if God's really in it, you'll see some incredible things happen. That contentment came with finding Christ.
Welcome to another episode of the Radical Hospitality Podcast. I'm your host, Zeke Freeman. So today, as guests, we've got Bruce O'Neill, and we're down in Dallas at Manna Worldwide's headquarters. What began as a calling more than 25 years ago has grown into an organization serving children and families throughout more than 170 projects over 40 countries, including schools, nutrition centers, clean water initiatives, and medical clinics around the country. Bruce's story is really compelling. It's simply the scale of what's been built and the kind of life that's really just produced an incredible impact. So I'm very honored to be able to sit down with Bruce. I've had a intertwine of story and connection through Manna over the last few years. It began as a mission trip with my dad's church, and my dad's here down in Texas helping me today do some interviews. That growth turned into friendships with his son, Keith O'Neill and Mark. Helped them work on Mango Tree coffee shops, and really over the years have just developed a deep friendship and respect for what they've done at Manna Worldwide. And so, Bruce, thank you so much for taking the time to sit down with me and to talk.
Thank you so much. I really enjoy being here today, and you've been a dear friend for many years, and I appreciate the time and the work and the effort you've put in to help Manna be even better with our designing of our coffee shops and all the work you've done in the past. And want to thank you, my friend.
Pleasure. So I'd love to just start, Bruce, if you would kind of take us back before there's like feeding centers and projects and everything that you guys have built here. Who was Bruce? What was kind of the beginning? What kind of person were you when you started hearing God tap on your shoulders to get into this calling of building Manna?
Kind of a strange beginning and I'll try to make it short, but I grew up in a household where my dad was an alcoholic and really grew up poor. And so as I grew up, all I wanted to do was make money. I knew what it was like to be poor, like to be hungry at times. And so I felt like I could make money, I could be happy in life. And so I had a great mom, but once again, that it was a little difficult, to say the least. So when I started out, basically in North Texas, my dad was a school teacher, became a principal. The military asked him to come back during the Vietnam War as an officer. He went in the military and then became an alcoholic, and which was a shame, but that's the way life goes sometimes. So when I grew up, I thought the only way to be happy was to make a lot of money. And I wanted to make a lot of money. My grandfather was an engineer for Shell Oil. He'd done quite well. I'd seen what they'd done, and I had no real background in life. All I knew was make money to be happy. So I met a girl when I was about 17. She was just turned 16, Pamela, and asked her out on a date, and she asked me what church I went to. And so I panicked. I thought, oh boy, here's one of these Christian girls, and man, what have I got myself into? And so then I made up a lie real fast and said, well, I've been looking for a good church to go to. And she said, do you go to my church? I said, that's great. I said, Sunday, I guess you go? And she said, yeah. So I said, okay, yeah, I'll go to church. We're going out tonight. And she said, yes. We went out, and when she was 18 and I just turned 20, we were married. I really didn't get the Christian thing. I went to church every Sunday with her, but I hated church because I never listened to a word, nothing said. I'd be there in body only, thinking about how I can make more money during the week. And so when we got married, I told her on our honeymoon, I said, hey, babe, listen, you're a good Christian. You know, I'm a Christian, which was a lie. But I said, I'm not going to go to church anymore. And because I've got my future, I've got to raise money, I've got to get a company going. And so you go to church. I'm glad we have kids one day. I want you to take them to church. And she said, "Oh, you think so? You're going to church?" And so I said, "Yes, ma'am." So I went to church for the next 7 years with her every Sunday, never listened to a word, not a word. I'd be there bored stiff, thinking about my my company and how I could make more money.
What was your company at the time?
Well, I had a small flooring company,
Okay.
exotic flooring.
Yeah.
And but it just really took off and did rather well. And I uh I made great future, a great I was just really blessed.
Yeah. Yeah.
And by the age of whopping old age of 27,
Okay.
I'd reached all of my life's ambitions. We had houses, cars, and everything I thought would make me happy. And I love my wife. We had our first child, and things were going well, but there was an emptiness in me. And I couldn't figure it out because I thought if you made a lot of money, you would be fulfilled. But there was just something empty in me. And I woke up every morning for 6 months. We just moved into the golf course community and everything. I thought, well, this is it. But I woke up every morning for 6 months, roughly. The first thought I had was, there's got to be more to life than this. What am I going to do? Just get more money? And that's not going to make me happier. And I'm going to die one day. And what's it all for? And after 6 months, I woke up one morning and thought, okay, if you're a real God, I'm going to give you one chance. I was real generous, you know. I'll go to church again with my wife this coming Sunday, but I'll listen to my first sermon. And I did. I listened to that first sermon, and it really grabbed my heart. And I thought, I don't want this to be an emotional thing. No, I can't do anything. You know, I just maybe there's just emotion playing here. So I went back to church with her that night, which I'd never done, and listened to a sermon. Really got me. The next week I went, I listened to the sermon. It really stirred my heart, and I gave my life to Christ. That changed everything in my life. Before then, my employees would have told you he's a guy that gets mad, and he's a guy that loses his temper. He's a guy that, you gotta make sure you're doing everything right, or Bruce is gonna really nail you, you know. And so I remember after I gave my life to Christ, didn't take long, and when my employees stopped me one day and said, "What happened to you?" Said, you really changed. And I explained to him and what God had done in my life, brought him to church with me. And within a matter of 6 months, I just knew God wanted us to do something. So we sold everything, houses and cars, and went to a seminary in another state, Springfield, Missouri. Finished seminary, worked an internship at a church in Houston, and then took my three boys at the time. They were all little guys, and took them to the mission field to Japan. And we were missionaries in Japan, and then got a call from the Philippines from another missionary who said, "Hey, can you come and help us start a seminary here?" So I thought, well, I'll go down to the Philippines and help them start a seminary and maybe go back to Japan or whatever. Went down there, and next thing I know, almost 20 years go by.
Wow.
And I'm still in the Philippines.
What did that cost you? Like when you felt that tap to leave all that behind? I mean, that's a if you worked those years to find fulfillment and built up something that had worked well, and and then you're trading that out. Yeah. What was that like in that moment for you? Was that something that was like natural and easy? Did that uh, Hamlet come along beside you?
It's a great question. Well, it was almost from the beginning after I gave my life to Christ. Within less than a month, God began to burden my heart and thinking, how many people are there here in the States that never hear what I heard? And and I thought how it changed my life, gave me a new outlook, made me happy. It just radically changed my life. And I thought a missionary came to our church. He spoke about his particular country. He was in Australia. Spoke about how many Australians don't know Christ. And then other missionaries come, and I thought, God, that's what you want me to do. You want me to be a missionary. And so I went to Pam with fear and trepidation and said, baby, I think God is calling calling us to be missionaries. And she started crying. And she said, when I was 12, I felt like God wanted us to be a missionary. And I've always wondered why I wasn't a missionary. And she said, I'm thrilled that I'm in 100%. So we both went to college, got a got a degree. And
What did what do you feel like the season of learning entrepreneurship and business carried into your work as a missionary?
it has been a great help because a lot of times there are people that have a real heart to do something, but like us all, every one of us lacked in some areas. And so it helped me become a little more of an entrepreneur. But that's not enough. Obviously, I feel like the only way we've been are seeing things accomplished is because God has done amazing things in our life, that doors that I never would have looked at. He's opened windows that I never looked at. He's opened, and it just seemed like one thing after another. So the business acumen definitely helped me. But to be honest with you, it was God opening more doors and being ready. And I've said this to all of our employees, all of our directors, assistant directors here at Manna: do something scary. Yeah, everybody knows Bruce's motto, do something scary. I was at lunch yesterday with a couple of our directors, and one of them said, yeah, we know we got to do something scary, because in business, whether it be business, but even more so in what we're doing with this nonprofit, there are many times where we'll have opportunities around the world that will be hundreds of thousands of dollars that we'll have to raise, millions of dollars. And you think, well, we've got all these other projects. How are we going to add another project to it? And it really just, it comes with, number one, faith that if God really wants you to do this, He'll supply it. And then the acclimate to just say, hey, if I am just an individual that's going to be steady after this, trying to raise these funds, trying to get this project off the ground, and the Lord's behind this, it works every time.
I've heard this a lot. Like you, in for people like yourself who've actually gone out and created a lot of things. Like one of the key components is being willing to take risks. And Christian roles often calls faith.
Yeah.
Yeah. How do you know the difference between whether I am pushing into risk and faith uh, versus, hey, that's just my own ego versus God calling? Or do you ever know?
You know, let me take it twofold, two different directions here. In business, if you're not really trusting in anything but yourself, you got to realize that there are going to be failures, which there are in ministry or in nonprofits. there's going to be failures. But I found in business, if knowledge is the key element you need to really not jump into anything. When I was young, starting off, then I'd see an opportunity and I'd get excited about it and I want to jump into it. Times it was like, yeah, it's fairly good. At times it wasn't. At times it was great. But it didn't take me long to realize that knowledge is what you've got to have. You've got to be willing to step out, but step out, do something scary, but you've got to have the knowledge to do it, to see what the cost is going to be, what the timeline's going to be. Really, is this going to be a short fix where I can get this company or whatever it is to be profitable within 1 year, 2 years? Do I have the funding to last that long? And so that really was the way I'd attack it. In the nonprofit world and with faith, it's a little both. I mean, if an individual says, "Hey, I want to go out and I want to start a feeding center in Yugoslavia or the old Yugoslavia, or somewhere near Romania, or whatever it may be, and it's going to cost 500,000 to build this building, and we're going to have this much money." Then you've got to say, "Wait, number one, is God in this? Truly, He hasn't given me such a burden, and feel my heart that this is what we've got to do." And I've been in those situations so many times. And then, will I have the faith to go forward with it? Will I be willing to step out by faith, as you just said, to do it? Those two things come together, then it's easy. It doesn't bother me at all.
Yeah. So what did that look like? You guys moved from the States and then you went to Japan first
Mhm.
and then to the Philippines.
Right.
What was life like living on the mission field for you and your family, your kids?
I will say this is what happens to about 99% of all missionaries. When you go to the field and you get there, you got your family, you don't have a place to live, you have to get a place to live, you don't know anybody and everything. It stinks. It really stinks. I mean, you're going to get there and say, "Oh man, it's overwhelming." And even if you're working with helping other missionaries, are trying to help you get set up and all, you're out of your culture. You don't know the language. You don't know really your way around. You don't know how to go to the store and what's the word for bread. And so it's extremely difficult the first year. But then as you're learning the language, you're getting your footing in that country, and you have a heart. You really have a heart for what you're doing. Because, if I was, when I was a missionary to Japan and the Philippines, in the beginning, if I didn't know there was a reason I was here, if I didn't know that God was really behind this, I would have probably given up that first year. And I think about 99% of other missionaries would. But then after that first year, you're in language school, you've got a place to live, you know how to go out and buy bread, at least your language ability, depending on the country and the difficulty of the language, you're getting around and all. After that first year, then it becomes so much easier, and you really develop a love for the people, and then it's hard to ever leave it. When we went from Japan to the Philippines, um, it was hard again because we didn't know Tagalog. We had to study the language again. We had to go through getting a house and starting meeting people and then starting a church and a ministry. And the first year was rough again. But then when we knew we were going to move back to the States and start Manna, I'll just tell you what my wife said. I said, "Baby, we both know this is what God wants us to go back to the States, start Manna." She started crying. And she said, "If we do that, we'll never be happy again. Because we both planned on dying in the Philippines one day. We love the Filipino people. We love the Japanese people. And that's where our heart was. We didn't want to go back to States. Um, we had ministry going that was, God was really blessing. And it was really difficult to think, I'm going back to States and I'm going to start a ministry that I pray God is behind. He's given us that burden to do it. But we're going to leave everything and start over again. We got back to States and we'd been, close to 20 years on the field. And it would
The
have,
boys, or was Keith raised there?
yeah, all of my boys were raised on the field.
How many boys do you have?
3 boys.
Okay.
Yeah, we had to take Keith back to the States, get him set up in college, and then go back to Philippines. That was hard.
Yeah.
And the U.S. then had become like that foreign country. When we came back to start Manna, I remember Pam going to the grocery store the first time, and she said, "It's so difficult, babe, because when you go into a store here, you're not going in the market and getting something you need. You're going in," her words, "there's 50 different cereals." And she said, the first time she went in the grocery store, she was just overwhelmed by variety. And she ended up turning around and going home. She just said, "It's just too much here." Just the process just overwhelmed her.
Yeah. I'm curious, what does success look like for a missionary? I'm kind of thinking about this coming from, you know, you obviously have a business driven mind, and the objective there is, originally to, grow that company. You're doing marketing, you're doing management, you're doing sales. Uh, and I think there's probably an equivalent. I know I just got done doing a capital raise. As a missionary, you've got to be able to bring in funding. And so you have to tell a story that has, purpose and meaning. And I found even in the secular world where you're doing work, if it has purpose and meaning, that's much easier to raise capital. And as a missionary, you're having to do that, I assume, but you're also having to define what success looks like. What do those layers look like as a missionary defining success, and what the pieces that you have to put together during 20 years?
You know, paramount is faith. Without faith, without trusting God, I promise you I couldn't do it. I've said 1,000 times, even as a missionary on the field, if we were not missionaries, I couldn't do this as a businessman. I just moved back states.
Yeah.
It's just so different. You're just changing your mindset. So, um, it, but as setting up, you want structure. And when we went over to the field, we wanted structure, we wanted a plan, we wanted to know where we're going, how we're going to do it, and why we're doing it. And so you'd set up a template of here's how I'm going to develop this process. But yet, it makes it sound like, pardon me, if you have a plan, then you can become successful, quote unquote.
And again, what do you find? Is it building community? Is it helping bring people to Christ? Is it building a church?
Relationships.
Yeah.
Relationships, showing people, because when I'll give you an example. We went into a town called Padilla and started church in the Philippines, suburb of Manila in the Philippines. We didn't know anybody there. The local church in that city had started. It was the first Catholic church to ever start in the Philippines. It was a big cathedral. Um, they ran about 60 people was all for the city. It was just a dead church.
Yeah.
And, I'm not bashing the Catholics, that's the way it was.
Yeah.
And so when we moved into that community, there were no Protestant works at all. And so the Lord, it had to have been the Lord, allowed us to meet a woman there. And everybody else would not rent us space to start even a Bible study because we were Protestant and they were Catholics. Now, their determination of Catholics was my great grandmother was Catholic. I'm a Catholic. I don't know anything about the faith, but I'm a Catholic. Kind of a, it was more of a tradition and no real connection with Christ or the church. So, but they knew that we weren't one of them, and so they wouldn't rent us anything. And I just kept knocking doors, talking to people, and finally met one lady who said, "Why don't you start a church?" We'd been there for about 3 or 4 weeks. I said, "Nobody will rent to us they're all happy until they find out we're Protestant, and then they won't rent us a building or anything." And she said, "I've got a bamboo building that I'll let you use." And I said, "Well, great." So we started out it's called a Swali Bahai, which means Swali is is a, a kind of a storage house. It's made out of bamboo. So we started there. The church really grew, and we end up long story short, end up building a church, later on a school and feeding program there, and it just really grew in that community because of relationships with people. When that lady just for some reason just really liked us, and other people, when they saw that we were there to help, they began to like us. The first feeding center I ever started was there.
I was going to say, was this the first feeding center?
Yeah. And
what made you decide to do that?
well, that's so important. It was really strange because we started in a middle class area right on the national highway there, which was very small. And the church was doing pretty good in the beginning. A lady came to our church one day just walking by. She had a child in her arm that was very emaciated. And she said, "Can you help me feed my child?" So we did what anybody else would do. You know, I reached in my wallet and I gave her some money. And Pam had an occasion or two where, several occasions, I should say, where mothers would ask her and she would reach in her purse and give money. But it didn't take long. Within a short period of time, that really began to bother me because I thought long term, we're not helping that family. That lady's going to continue going out trying to find money. Some days will be good, some days will be bad. People do that. I was in a middle class area, but we would see that on a daily basis. And I thought, how are they ever going to find Christ? If I had a child that was hungry, that'd be my number one priority. I'm not looking for the church.
Yeah.
And it bothered me. And Pam and I decided that we would start a really small feeding project because our money was limited. And so we thought maybe we could feed 10 children a day. We could feed 10 children and teach them the Bible. And by the way, they didn't have to even stay for the Bible lesson. They could go home. We just feed them, they could go home. But within 3 months, we had 250 children coming every day. And another organization said, "Hey, man, we love what you're doing. We'll give you some money." And they gave us some money. We raised some money from the States. And it just, when that community saw that we were there to stay, not to help for a day or two or a month or a year, but we were there to stay, they loved us. They appreciated us. And the middle class that had been a little stoic about coming to a Protestant work, they began to come, and the church just exploded. It was just a great blessing, and we started a school there. Pardon me, a school there, and it really thrived and got used to.
So, in United States. Uh, we have some children that are hungry, and there is needs in
Yes.
communities. Yeah, but it's probably not something that we see more on a day to day basis. Like how how big of an issue is this, and in terms of a problem to be solved, and how big of a need, obviously, it depends on where you're going, and how has that changed, I guess, over the years from when you started to what it is today.
Well, obviously, the need overseas is 100 times worse. However, we have compassion for American kids too. And so we've started several projects in different states to help in after school programs and uh, feeding programs during weekends where they're not being fed at the school. And so we've tried to work with churches here in the U.S. to start these programs, but the majority of our programs are in the 46 other countries that we have.
And the programs and the needs that they're fulfilling in terms of feeding kids, um, what is that? Maybe take us into specifics, like in the Philippines where you saw this. Like, uh, are they not being generally able to have 3 meals a day? Like, what is the need, and why is that a gap that is, I guess, working to reach kids?
The best way to really understand that, obviously, is
What is a piece?
yeah.
Yeah.
It's really we call it a nutrition center. I think I said feeding center, but the best way to understand it is go see it. And we tell our people that help support people that don't support the projects, please stop into any project around the world. There's 247 of them where there's schools, orphanages, feeding centers, work projects. You don't even need to announce it. We want you to go and see that it's the same when I'll take you, or you'll go by yourself and just drop in. Um, the programs we have are generally in countries with great needs. Philippines is a prosperous country, but there are so many areas where they have squatter areas where people just have to move in from the province. They set up a house that's made out of tent material and sometimes corrugated metal for a roof or something, that just a hodgepodge house. Many of them will have several kids, and dad is trying to get a job in the city, maybe gets a job, makes minimal wages, but with whether it be 5 kids in the family or 2 kids, you'll see almost every time that they're usually in the squatter areas very malnourished and they're underweight. Their height is diminished because of the lack of nutrition. And we take pictures of every child that comes in to our projects, the day one. And what we set as a priority on every project we have is this. Will a child come in, we'll weigh them, we'll take a picture of them, we'll check vital signs, see how they're doing. And then as the months go by, you'll see a great improvement in that child because that family many times can only eat 1 meal a day. And sometimes that 1 meal may be a little rice. Uh, I can't tell you how many times that when we started our feeding project there, the kids would come in so hungry, or many of them would come in with just a lump of sugar. And that's all their parents could afford was a lump of sugar. And they would eat that and then maybe get a little rice for lunch or maybe for dinner, and sometimes nothing. So it's just tragic because when you see these kids start to thrive and develop, and our initiative, our goal is to not only take a child for a year or two and then throw them back into poverty. When we bring a child on, we'll tell the parents, your child comes here until they're 18. They start off as young as, well, we've had children that have just been more or less a few months old, come their parents bring them
Yeah.
every day up to 18. And then when they turn 18, we will send them to a training school to learn occupation, or we'll send them to college so they can learn a skill. Because if you don't, you'll never get kids out of poverty. When we were there in the Philippines, we would see so many times where good intentioned people from another country, the US, Sweden, Norway, would come in for a year, maybe two, and they'd be gone. The kids they brought in or people they helped were back into poverty, and they were going to have children of their own one day that would grow up in poverty. We want to break that chain.
Yeah. Yeah, and I've seen this myself. So it is shocking. Like, when I went down to Guatemala, and even as I was there originally as a 13-year-old kid, and then back again in 2018. And there is sections of the world, and it's here as well, where extreme poverty exists. It's just completely different from what you see in your modern day life from day to day. And that prompts something at the end of community that the child should not be able to have food and should the shoulder. And it's a really complex problem. Is that how you come in and not create, you know, dependency, uh, U.S. hero syndrome of, hey, I'm coming in to shining armor to save, uh, and create a long term path for you guys have been working on this for a long time now. So not a simple, solution. You need to meet the need, but then you need to start thinking long term. So you mentioned there's a couple of components of that. There's uh, feeding centers, there's schools, some orphanages. What does that have to program? How has that worked over the last 20 years of taking kids that are desperately hungry, actually being yeah, uh, well, thriving, behaviors.
That is a great problem, and I tell you, I've seen that so many times where good-minded people will come in, and as one book says, where giving hurts. You can destroy a community by just throwing money at them and saying, "Here, take this money," and many of the people don't know how to use it. They'll they'll just distribute it to everybody, and nobody's got enough to live off, and other times just waste of money. So we try to teach our children when they come. If there's not a school for those hungry kids, we will start a school in that area because education is obviously a priority. We always have a church with every program we start around the world. If we don't have a church there, we'll start one. Now, we never tell a child or a young man or young woman, hey, to get food, you have to go to church. That is not. If they want to come and eat every day at the project, that's great. And they want to go to church, wonderful. But we feel like, and once again, I guess I go back to my past of how God really gave me a fulfillment once I found Christ. I feel like that helps so many people. And roughly 90 to 95% of the kids that go to our project want to go there because they find people that love them. That's my mother loved me, but that was something that I felt like was lacking. When I was hungry, I didn't have people that cared for me. I didn't have, when I'd have nasty jeans on that were too short with holes in them going to school. Nobody said, "Hey, Bruce, can we buy you some new clothes?" And so I always felt like I was the only one to pull myself out of this. And a lot of people aren't able to pull themselves out of poverty because of their environment. So we want to let those kids know that they are loved. We want to let the parents know they're loved. and we want to tell them, hey, here's what happened to me. Here's how I found the love of Christ, love of community, love of people was through the church. If you don't feel that works for you, just come here to eat. But we just find the majority of them because they 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 see Christ's love through the project. And so many of our people in the church just volunteer to work in that feeding program. And so they love on the kids. And it builds relationships where some of these kids don't have parents, don't have mom, don't have dad. And many times they live on the street. And when you go into a community where people in that church really genuinely care about you, and most of our projects around the world, they're built on volunteers. And so when they end up loving the kids, it builds that relationship, that bond, and gives them a self-worth. So those kids are taught from day one, number one, Christ is important in your life. He will change your life. You don't feel that way, okay. But we're going to love you despite that. That has no bearing on it. We're going to care for you and help you grow. And we mentor these children. And once again, if they don't have school, we supply the school because we believe that the education is another strain factor to get them out of poverty. So when they finish with our program at 18, they have got a body that's well developed now.
Mm.
They've got a community that loves them. They've got support. They've got families they've become a part of through the church and through our nutrition center. So it builds relationships. So many of those young men and women that lived in squalor. Now we have lawyers that have our projects around the world. We have doctors, we have nurses. Um, the pictures in the other room of a little girl in Mongolia out living in the Gobi Desert. She's about 6 years old.
What's
Uh,
her name?
uh, Ume.
Okay.
And I believe that's her name. I'm getting old and forgetting these things. But anyway, I met her in the Gobi Desert. She went to a project there and lived on nothing, lived in a tent all her life. And she came to a feeding program, nutrition center, actually. She came there. We sent her to school. She did well. She became a nurse. I can tell you, and it's doing very well in Mongolia now. I can tell you stories of little kids on the street. I think that two little girls that we started a project on another island in the Philippines. And one of the little girls, they were living on the street. They're both about 5 years old, no family, nothing. And one of the little girls said to the other one, hey, there's a place down the street at this church called Manna Worldwide. And I heard they feed kids like us. And so they both went down there. They started being fed. People in the church love these two little girls. They took them into their homes. They continued with our MANA project, graduated to high school at 18, went to college. Both those girls are professors.
Wow.
Pardon me. And the sea. I was in I was on this island Cebu, and the pastor said, do you know these two girls? And I said, I'm sorry, but I don't. We have tens of thousands of kids around the world. I can't remember all their names, obviously. And he told me their story and how they were professors. And they came up to me and said, can we hug you? That's what I love. And, we want to give people a chance to find Christ, to find a life out of poverty. That's the goal. That's God's been so good to us.
Yeah. I I think this is such a miracle. Like when you look at what like y'all had a roads that life didn't end up at, and God gives you the opportunity to step in, and And the time allows you to see, that that person ends up being in a different place. But think of I've got a little neighbor girl, um, and then a friend of ours adopted anyway to Ethiopia, and he adopted her out of um, they were in a tin shack in a village, um, and she was kind of the mediator between our boys. So she grew up with our boys, this Asha, and yeah, and I watched her and her life, and just as the neighbor coming in, uh, and our friends that helped kind of provide that safe home for her. Yeah, now she's had a college degree, and it's just living a beautiful life where totally different world. Uh, she could have been on the streets poverty. I mean, here's a very, just wonderful human beings, and great friends with our kids. Yeah, because someone decided to step in and make an impact. And that's one's closest to me because I've actually seen. She had an entirety, um, and the impact of what you guys are doing consistently with me. Are real people. Yeah, the kids on this uh, on the boards won't be kids forever. They're going to eventually be adults, and the choice of their life is: are they going to continue to stay in a cycle of life or poverty, or do they get the same opportunities that kid that's lucky enough to be born in America or a loving home gets to have? And the difference of saying I'm going to do that or not is really life changing in that sense. So when you were in uh, the Philippines working as a missionary, you saw a fundamental problem that made you leave that and start Manna. Uh, and you talked a little bit about the structure of Manna and what it's accomplishing, but maybe kind of just walk into that a little bit. What did you see the need for an organization of Manna to be, and what did you envision it to be when you started?
Great question. Uh, It is really strange because when we saw the need there, we saw programs had come in many times, as I said before, and they'd be there maybe a year, maybe 2 years, and then they'd close down and go on. And then I thought maybe we need to start something, but yet how would we do it? It's we had a very limited budget, and I was concerned starting it because before I was a Christian, just a business person, I'd see all the time on TV, promotional go on and say, hey, send us this money and we're going to feed kids. And I'd say that's all well and good. But then I'd hear the stories of a few, maybe it's a minority, uh, people buying big houses and cars and they're the head of them and this nonprofit. And that drove me crazy. It's like, well, I don't want to send you any money. I'm not going to buy you a new lake house, and
Yeah.
so when we started Manna, we started a little different. We came under the decision from initially that we were not going to make the money from Manna personally. That any money we could raise would go to the kids, and then the initiative was that we would set up when we came back to the U.S. to set up the program. Um, I wanted to start an organization that might eventually, as it grew, we were able to get directors, assistant directors, and things like that to go around the world to do this. I didn't want half the money to go. The average in America right now, I haven't looked in several years, but the average nonprofit spends 49 cents out of every dollar sent to them on overhead. And I didn't want that to happen. So I thought, how can we change that projection for this organization we're starting? So I made a commitment myself that I would not draw a salary from Manna. that I would have my salary come from other sources. And what I had at that time, because we were missionaries, is we had churches all over this country that would send in $100 a month, $50 a month to support Pam and I on the field. Well, we began to tell them, we're going to start this organization. I'd like you to continue sending that money to for our salary.
Hmm.
And it wasn't, it was uh, a good income, but definitely not an income where you'd be able to live on the high side of life. But I was very happy with what we had come in, very happy. So we would not draw salary. So Manna was Pam and I. The church we were going to, Hallmark Church, said, "Hey, y'all need an office. We have a little bitty office, and it was really big enough for one person, and but you can use it. We're not using it." So Pam, my wife, used that office, wasn't big enough for both of us. So I would stay home, and I worked on my kitchen table, little office, and started there. And then we, my thought as a business person, so to speak, I thought, okay, if we do this well, within the first 5 years, maybe we could have 4 projects and maybe be in 2 countries. And that was my goal. But God had something completely that just overwhelmed me. Within the first 2 years, we just exploded. And it was all a God thing, that nothing I had done special. In 5 years, we had employees, and God just blessed Manna. We were in, I think in that time we were in 30 something countries. Um, and what we did was, when a person would come to us and say, "Man, I love what you're doing. I would love to do this full time." And they'd be all excited about, we can do this, and boy, in our life, we'll go to these countries and help these kids. And then I'd have to break it to them, okay, you can do this, but we don't pay you a salary. And so, and there are good people that wanted to do that, but probably about 70% of them would say, "Oh, I can't do that." And the thing is, we just tell them, if you're going to be a director, assistant director, you've got to raise your own salary, which means you've got to go out churches and tell them what you're doing. They want to sponsor you for $100 a month or whatever. They could do that. Family and friends could support you every month through this nonprofit organization. And then you can build that up to a cap, which would be the medium income of Americans. And that's all you can build, because we're not going to have you come in as an assistant director and raise a ton of money for you and your family. We want you to be comfortable. We want you to live a good life, have a car and a house, but we don't want to waste money. So you can build up to this cap. And we would find, generally speaking, the cream of the crop that would be like, "Hey, I'll do that." And so we, to this day, we do not pay any of our directors, any of our assistant directors in the Denver office or the Fort Worth office. They have to raise their own income. We've got several engineers that have come to work with Manna, lawyers, and they've all had to raise their own salary. The only people we have to pay a salary to, and I'd say have to, we want to, are people that work in our offices in Denver and Fort Worth. We pay them a salary because a bookkeeper or an assistant cannot go out to their family and say, "I want to be a lawyer for Manna. I want to be a bookkeeper for Manna. I want to be an assistant, office manager." So we actually pay them a salary, but we're audited every year by an independent auditing firm that we pay. So anybody can look at our records and see what goes out to the children. Last year, I believe our overhead was 5.2% of all monies raised for the kids. And that's what I wanted to see happen. I didn't want to see a ministry that was raising a lot of money for the people that work for it and very little for kids.
Yeah. Yeah. So looking back over
5 years.
5 years, how has this looked different than what you originally envisioned it to be?
Um, Staggeringly different. I felt like this would be a small mom and pop organization. I really, lack of faith, I guess. I was afraid that, to be honest, I was afraid that churches would look at me starting this program and say, oh, this is some nonprofit that doesn't care about the kids spiritually. They just want to go out and raise money to help kids, which is valuable. But churches wouldn't be interested in that. And they would just dump us, not take man offer support, not start feeding programs. Um, but we were just delighted because churches got behind us in ways we never dreamed. Companies got behind us uh, just just phenomenally. We've got several big companies that give to Manna. They don't care that we're helping these kids spiritually. But they do care that we're helping them physically. Now, there's a few companies that want us to help them spiritually too.
Yeah.
But it grew in ways that I could never see or believe or had the ability. I'm not, I don't have the ability to grow an organization this big. I really don't. But God just opened up massive doors that we just never dreamed of. From We've got people that have built $1 million buildings that God just moved in their heart, and I can tell you story after story. Like in Ukraine right now, where we started a project there. Oh, it's been about 20 years ago or so. And long story short, I was looking for land to build a nutrition center in, and it was so expensive. Land was, and just about to give up. And a friend had a friend that he introduced me to, a guy that was an American that had gone over there and was building this huge 5-story building, a massive building. It was about 60, 70% done. And he was building it was going to be a small convention center, and he was going to make money from it and all. And through a long story short, like I said, um, finally I was just really burdened by the Holy Spirit. And I said, hey, I want you to pray about something. The guy was Christian. And I said, I want you to pray about giving this building to Manna so we could start a orphanage here. And he said, are you crazy? I said, man, I've spent a lot of money on this building. And I said, hey, I know it's a wild thought, but the Lord just impressed me to ask you. And he said, yeah, well, it's not going to happen. Less than 2 weeks, we own that building. He ended up giving us the building. It's a great orphanage there. So things happen like that that you never dreamed of. And I could tell you story after story around the world where land was given to us, buildings were given to us. Business people from America came over to it on a trip and said, hey, I'll pay for that orphanage, a big orphanage in the Philippines. You know, I mean, just story after story.
So how does I love building. I'm an architect, it's such a, for me, it's just, there's nothing better than like envisioning something and, seeing it come to creation. What is, and I'm big as part of the problem with doing it is always the financing. How do you make all these things work? And, but the reality is like, hey, when we're making spaces, we're really, yes, it needs to have a financial input, but more than that, it's important that we're creating spaces that have uh, create community, create impact, and are a home for people to gather, or a coffee shop which I love. I was out at National Community Church last week talking to Mark Patterson, and he talks about, they built Ebenezer, creating and that is like the modern well. People gather. We work together with Mango Tree, creating those spaces. And so this idea of creating spaces, whether they're orphanages or coffee shops or feeding centers, really engages, this creativity of building places that make community impact. When you guys go in and are creating spaces for that, what does that process look like? And especially in areas of other parts of the world versus doing it here, um, and how much is that in play with Manna?
Well, I've always loved to build. It's just been something that I've always enjoyed. So, especially for the first, 15 years, I would go to a field where we need to build something, and I designed something for them and stay there and help them get the building started and going. And that just was a real point of enjoyment for me. I love the thought of getting something built up, and so that was great. And then after it just kept morphing into the position that we needed more and more. Then we've used other people on the ground to help us a lot. Build buildings and get the program started as far as the construction and all. And that has just really gone well for us. And there are places where we'll go and there'll be a church there. They'll want a nutrition center. We'll build right onto their building. There are places where we'll build a standalone and then church will be very close to it. Just every situation is different depending on the needs of that community. So it, to me, it's just invigorating to see projects start off, and I enjoy that part more than anything.
Yeah. And I also think it's great. It's how I got connected with Manna. It's the way that you're also kind of connecting with churches. So it gives other churches an opportunity, maybe upgrades people to come in and participate, see what you're
Yes.
doing, be on the ground. Some of us out there that are passionate about building, it's a way to kind of give back as well. Um, so I've gotten to know your son Keith quite a bit over the last few years, and he's a good friend. We share a lot of passions and uh, coffee and adventure, and he's got two boys that are similar in age. And I know you have also uh, done a lot of adventures with him over the years. As kind of, it feels like it's part of the ethos of Manna, where you're not just going out and always just doing traditional capital raising. I've seen you guys bike across the U.S., climb Mount Kilimanjaro, do 14ers. Where did the adventure part start in Manna, and how do you guys incorporate that?
Well, Keith, that is our president now, about 3 years ago, I went to the board of trustees and said, "Hey, I want to wait until I get too old. You guys want me to leave?" I said, "I want to install a new president within the year, and I'll still work full time at Manna and, do a lot of what I've always done. But we need a guy that will be younger than take the role." And I said, "You guys are just going to have to pick someone and I'll mentor them until they can take it." And they said instantly, well, one of the board members, we've got 15 board members, said, "Hey, we know who we want." And I was happy when he said it's Keith. And the other guys were like, "Yep, Keith." I mean, everybody unanimously said Keith's got to be the guy. Um, and Keith has just done a wonderful job. He's a man of faith. He's a guy that has a vision, and he's got good friends like you. And that's just been wonderful because we work with church people, we work with business people, we work with a large gamut of different individuals. But Keith has an entrepreneurial spirit. I remember when he came to me, we were in one of our meetings. I think it was in Colorado, and he said, "Dad, we need to start a coffee business." And Bruce O'Neill, with his face, said, absolutely not. I said, look at the percentages of coffee companies that start up or coffee shops that start up that fail. I mean, in staggering rates. And I said, how am I going to tell everybody that we started a coffee shop and that, we had to close it down because it just doesn't have the business to sustain itself, and we spent $200,000 on it, and that money's gone. I said, I'm not willing to do that. If you got a sure bet, I'll go with it. And he said, no, Dad, I really believe it'll work. And I said, no. And so about 6 months later, it came to me again and said, I know we can do it. I know God's behind it. And I just like, nah. And then we were at, probably 4 or 5 months later, we were in Africa together in Kenya. And we were standing under a huge mango tree that's at one of our schools and nutrition centers right there. It runs somewhere in the neighborhood of 400 or 500 kids there at that particular nutrition center. He said, Dad, I'm telling you for the third time, this is where I believe God wants us to do. I believe we can make money off coffee shop, take all the profits from it, and use it to feed kids. And he just had such a great heart that day. I just said, okay, but after the first year, if it's not at least breaking even, we're going to have to shut it down. I just can't stand the thought of losing money. And he said, no, it won't. So we were able to get a building in Denver that needed massive work, which you're well aware of. You were the biggest part of design and organization for getting that thing going, and you did a great job. And as you're well aware of, we opened the doors of that place, and it was just swamped by people. I mean, from day one, it made a profit. And within that year, we made a huge profit on that coffee shop. It's one of the biggest ones in Denver. And we also roast coffee in there in a glass room. On the back of it, people watch it. And it's just the biggest problem we have. This thing's huge, and there's still not enough seating, but we're working on that. But anyway, and then now we've started another coffee shop in Denver, and we're proceeding to start more. So, even when my faith is not strong enough, God uses somebody else to push me. And so it was just wonderful to see. And Keith has done a great job with Manna since he's taken over. He's smarter than his dad. And so I really believe God's going to use him to continue growing the ministry and the nonprofit.
Yeah, that's so good. Especially hearing like this, season, and watching, I guess you guys from new stuff like uh, this piece of legacy that you've done so voraciously in building up, a business, but not saying, "Hey, this is mine, this is God's," and being. Uh, w- I couldn't imagine, just as a father myself, you know, uh, having a son that you can kind of bring in and mentor and hand over. How has that felt or been as a piece of legacy to see, okay, what I'm carrying, what I've built is going to carry on, as someone else is passionate about it.
That was almost my initial fear from the very early days of Manna. Because if you look at nonprofits in the United States, the average nonprofit dies with the second man taking over by staggering figures. They close down shop.
That's not their original vision.
Yeah. He retires, he leaves, the next guy takes it, and largest percentage of them end up shutting their doors, or at best, uh, greatly diminished after the founder dies or passes or turns it over. And so I always thought, I didn't know. At that time, Keith didn't work with us at Manna. We were into our first 5 years. It was really growing and all, but I was, I was in, Philippines. And no, I'm sorry. I was in, Cambodia. And let me change. I'm Mongolia.
Really? You guys are in so many different places
Yeah, it's
across
hard
the
to
world.
remember where you are at the time.
I imagine, like, you wake up, what country am I in?
That is it. And Keith was that at that time was the overseas manager for a large telecommunications company, and they sent him around the world to do different projects. And so you never knew where he was, whether he was in the U.S. or in Asia or Europe or where. So we were over there, and I called him up just on a whim and said, "Hey, son, where you at?" And he said, "Oh, well, I'm in the Philippines." And I said, "Hey, that's not very far from where I'm in Mongolia. Why don't you come over here?" And I got a group over here. I'm showing them the projects, nutrition centers, and we can mess around for a few days. And he said, "Okay." Came over and he worked with us for a couple of days. And on the second day, he came to me and said, "Dad, this is what I need to do. This is where I need to go." And I said, as a father would say, maybe not using my faith, but using my father part of me, I said, "Son, if you come to work for Manna, you're going to have to raise your own support. Your cap's going to be far less than you're making now. And, it'll change your whole life. You're going to have to scale back on everything. But I would love to have you come with us and work at Manna." And he said, "This is where God's calling me." He said, "I'm going to resign. I'm going to just make the commitment to come to Manna." He did. He went out there and raised his support, and God just used him in a great way.
What do you think was, uh, it sounds like, he was also achieving and being successful in the private world. And like, hey, we all have, like, we're driven people. um, but there's sounds like, he hit a point too, where there's something in there that asked for more purpose in what he was doing. Uh, what is it about this type of work you think that is missing in most work that men are encountering in their daily lives?
I think men and women that have a career, that love what they do, uh, and many of them are strong Christians, can be very happy in that field. Um, I think Keith had the same kind of feelings that I had, and that was that he even said, he said, "I want to have more purpose to my life." And he said, "Look at these kids, what they need. There's no food, or very little food, I should say, and for them, and they really are in a dead end, and they're going to have the next generation is going to be in a dead end, and no one's here to share Christ with them." And he said, "I want a bigger purpose in my life." He said, "Money isn't the most important thing." He said, "I really want to see God use me in a way that I can perpetuate this ministry, this nonprofit." And that was way before he ever thought about being president of it. He was just going to be a director. And he said, "Dad, if you'll have me," he said, "this is where my heart is." And I said, "Oh, man, I would love for you to come on." And he did. And he was able to raise his support. And he just had a great heart, which was perfect. He he brought part of his business acumen over. And, um, after about 5 more years, finally convinced me that we need to go to Apple computers, which was a hard switch for me. I'm glad we did, but
I still see you got a Dell.
no, no,
Okay, maybe behind.
that is an Apple. Oh, the monitor's a Dell,
Okay.
but I do have an Apple computer. But he just had a real heart for it, and I think that's it. And like I say, you can have a heart for ministry and work at IBM, and if that's where you feel like that's where you're best used, great. But then I believe there are others that just have an acumen to do something like this with a nonprofit.
How old are you now?
I'll be 71 here in August. I'm 72, pardon me, in August.
Just turned 45 last week.
Wow.
Looking ahead at the second half, you know, and someone who's gone through the full, you know, 30 years past me, and looking back on
Now,
you were my age.
I was in my 40s when I started Manna.
When you
So,
start,
there you go.
there you go. And there's a second half, what do you think's important in the second half, to be thinking about?
Well, a couple of things. I really want to make sure that I've had Emma and I've been married, getting close to 52 years, and I have tried to be a good husband, but I'm not getting any younger, and so I want to focus even more on my wife. Emma and I've had a great marriage, but you know, this thing's going to come to an end. Not the marriage, but life. And so I'm going to do far less with Manna and more with my wife, and that to me is great. And my grandkids, in fact, three of them flew in last night from Colorado, and they're at our house right now. And so,
Oh, nice.
I'm going to spend time with them.
Yeah. Good.
Yeah.
Yeah. What advice do you give to like guys like Keith and me in our second half that we should be thinking about?
My motto is do something scary.
Love it.
If you're happy doing what you're doing right now, there's nothing wrong with that. And I would add for myself, find fulfillment in what you do. More importantly, my personal belief, find fulfillment within Christ. And that has brought me such contentment in my life that I've never had until I accepted Christ as my Savior. That changed everything for me. And I would recommend that more than anything to an individual. You obviously are a Christian, and I'd say you've got that. If you feel like you're where you need to be, God wants you here in your position now. Stay here and do the best you can do, and keep sharing the word. Um, if you feel an inkling from the Lord that maybe there's some other direction, um, be willing to take that scary step and say, I'll do it. I've been there. I remember how surrendering to be, pardon me, surrendering to be a missionary was very scary for me. Surrendering to go to Bible college seminary was scary, and then going to the field and starting Manna. They're all steps in your life, and God's going to stretch your faith. People sometimes become stagnant in church. Many people grow in church, and God uses them in a great way. But I would say the majority of Christians kind of get to a base level where they're content financially, spiritually wise, and they just stagnate there. And if you're going to work or do something in America or even around the world, and you're happy doing that, and God's giving you contentment, stay with it. But always challenge yourself. You know, if God's really in it, you'll see some incredible things happen. Not that it doesn't happen in the secular world. I've seen good men and women, Christians and non-Christians, do some great things in businesses, and they're content. But as for me, um, that contentment came with finding Christ. Contentment for me came with serving Him and being willing to stretch and allow God to stretch me. And boy, God has through some of the biggest valleys has stretched me greatly and it caused me to have great fulfillment in my life and happiness. I've never, ever had a happier life than I have after finding Christ. I mean, the money was the money was okay, but it just nothing until I found Christ. That changed everything.
Yeah. If you looking back and all the areas that you spent time focusing on, building business to family to Manna, uh, projects, what stands out as the highest thing to say, I'm glad I spent time building that?
There's nothing in particularly that I would say other than my family, number one. Um, my three sons have brought such joy in my life. My wife, great joy, and now my grandkids. That's been the number one focus after Christ, and just seeing that the relationship with them is it's finding Christ, my family, man, that's been the three happiest things in my life. And seeing your kids do well in life, see them happy, see their kids, there's nothing better than that. I'll tell you.
Well, Bruce, it has been a pleasure just getting to sit and
My
chat
pleasure.
with you. We've gotten to spend time with you over the years, but never this much. And it's been really fun to get to hear your story, be a part of it in some way, and just so grateful for the legacy that you're leaving behind, and grateful for the time to spend with you. So,
Well, you've been a dear friend, and I really appreciate what you're doing. Man, you're really being used, buddy, and I'm really thankful for that.
all right. Well, did any of that record? It seemed like, boy, I've had issues